31. When the king returned from Yes'il city, the entire God-descended city was cheering. Tens of thousands of people gathered like an ocean, lining both sides of the dozens of meters wide waterways to welcome the king's return. Because Yes'il, the king of wisdom, had once again brought back divine revelation from the God-given land. On the back of the fusion monster, the king majestically accepted everyone's kneeling and shouting, but his thoughts had long flown far away. Half immersed in memories, half pondering the future. King, a young trilobite man beside him, gazing at the sun cup radiating brilliant light under the sun, asked, "Is this truly God's revelation?" This was Yes'il's grandson, a natural possessor of the wisdom power like him. Every time Yes'il saw him, he felt as if he was seeing his past self. The child clearly hadn't thought too deeply about it. He felt that the sun cup seemed to have been forcibly broken, and although it was mystical and beautiful, it didn't appear to be something bestowed by God. More like something discarded. Yes'il held the child's hand, looking at him with a devout and serious gaze, just as Red Lucia had held his hand in the past. He said in an unquestionable tone, "Eli, you must always remember, before God, there are no accidents, everything is God's will." The fusion monster stopped at the end of the waterway, and Yes'il led him down the stone bridge step by step. He said with his head held high, "It was my devotion that moved God." Yes'il firmly believed this to be true. 2 squads of guards carried the sun cup, replanted in a rectangular stone basin, passing through the wide avenue. The God's cup. Look at that sun-like color. It must be a divine object God took from the sun. A God-bestowed object. Oh, God, you have finally given us revelation again. The trilobite men in the city surged forward in frenzied excitement. But the moment they approached the sun cup, they immediately halted. They yearned to approach the God-bestowed object yet feared that their humble mortal bodies would taint God's glory. They could only kneel and look up at the brilliant God's cup, placing their hands on their chests, moved to tears and wailing. Yes'il was delighted and joyful at this scene. He said to Eli, "Look, everyone believes this to be God's revelation to us. The trilobite men still devoutly believe in the great God. God will surely see it." Yes'il recalled his father and how he had gained the favor of God Yinsai. His father had built a pyramid temple for God and offered his own offerings to God. He had seen these scenes on the murals in his father's wisdom palace and on the stone tablets standing before the God-given city. Temple. Yes'il silently uttered these 2 syllables. In an instant, his eyes radiated with light. That's right, a temple. He would build a temple even more magnificent and majestic than the pyramid temple his father had built. He wanted to let God know the devotion and faith of his believers. Yes'il returned to the royal palace and summoned the ministers of the Yinsai kingdom to discuss this matter. The king gestured from on high, describing what kind of temple to build, how grand and wondrous this temple should be, only in this way could it match God's noble status. The ministers below inscribed it on stone tablets while informing the king of roughly how many craftsmen and manpower might be needed. Among the crowd was Shlode, the priest of God. After Yes'il, the king of wisdom, finished speaking about building a temple for God Yinsai, he looked towards Shlode. "King." Shlode stepped forward and knelt at the feet of the king of wisdom. Yes'il walked down and placed his hand on Shlode's shoulder. "Shlode, you are God's first high priest and the one who found the sun cup and received God's revelation. From this day forth, you are the high priest serving God. In the future, the temple of God Yinsai will also be under your management." The so-called high priest was a priest who possessed advanced wisdom power after being enhanced by the sun cup. Shlode, who had become the high priest, was so excited that his pupils dilated. He was stunned for a long time before kneeling and exclaiming, "King! You!" But Yes'il immediately interrupted him and said, looking at him, "You should thank God. It is God who has bestowed everything upon you." Shlode nodded repeatedly, "The great God Yinsai will surely forgive the sins upon us because of the king's devotion." When everything was over, the entire royal palace was left empty and vast. Eli, looking at his grandfather sitting alone on the throne, asked in some confusion, "King, didn't you say that God said he doesn't need the faith and offerings of mortals?" Yes'il stroked his head. "God doesn't need the faith and offerings of mortals, but he will feel delight because of the faith and offerings of mortals. Just like a father doesn't need his child to bring him anything, but when the child presents a gift to the father, he will still be happy because of the child's heart. God is our Father and the Supreme Father of all trilobite men," Yes'il explained. Eli nodded, seeming to understand yet not fully comprehending. "Oh, I see. Behind the royal palace was a spacious and luxurious chamber, which was originally the place where Yesiel, the king of wisdom, displayed his sculptures. Yesiel had inherited his father's love for sculpting. But now, this luxurious chamber had been emptied and transformed into an indoor garden. The subjects of the god-descended city sought the most fertile soil from the seabed and laid it on the ground. The sun cup would also be transplanted here. Be careful, this is a god-bestowed object. If any mistakes are made, it would be blasphemy against God. Absolutely no mistakes can be made. Shlod's voice came from outside, and a squad of trilobite men carried in the rectangular flower pot. The temple had not yet begun construction, and Shlod, as the high priest, only had the title for now. His most important task at the moment was to keep the sun cup alive. If the god-bestowed object died in his hands, let alone the position of high priest, he would surely face the wrath of Yesiel, the king of wisdom. Shlod carefully transplanted the sun cup into the soil. The other priests following Shlod asked, "Will it come back to life?" Shlod firmly believed, since God has bestowed the sun cup upon us, he will surely let it bloom here. It was unknown whether Shlod's words came true or if the sun cup's vitality was inherently tenacious. The broken sun cup in the soil once again radiated strong vitality. This God-bestowed flower not only came back to life but also propagated two offshoots beside it. These offshoots blossomed, representing the future of the priestly lineage and becoming the source of power for the development of extraordinary abilities. From the open double-angle bracket Yinsai epic close double-angle bracket. King Yesiel sought God's forgiveness, and the merciful God bestowed the sun cup. Even though God had driven the firstborn lineage out of the God-permitted paradise, God was still watching over Redlichia's descendants. Drinking the divine power from the sun cup, the priests of God would receive the advanced priestly power bestowed by God. But this object named after the sun also warned the subjects of the Yinsai kingdom that its power was like the sun in the sky. It could nurture life and bring disaster. Unfortunately, King Yesiel did not understand God's mercy and the meaning behind it. 32. Yesiel led a group of people deep into the land and found a saltwater lake in the interior. There was nothing here, but it had a vast expanse of water rippling with white waves. The accumulated salt at the lakeshore resembled patches of white clouds. There should be a volcano beneath the lake, but it had long been extinct. "King," one of the men said, "this place matches the location you were seeking. Just a bit further ahead, and we'll arrive." After circling around this massive saltwater lake, he saw a towering mountain standing right beside this body of water. The azure sky and the majestic mountain, from the foot of the mountain, the cloud layers seemed to float around the peak. The lake at the base was like a mirror, as if it were a celestial realm. Yesiel was delighted. "This is the place." He climbed the mountain and pointed to both sides of the entrance to the mountain path, saying, "At the entrance here, two divine statues should be carved. One of my father, King Redlichia, and the other of me. The statues should kneel on one knee, expressing devotion to God. As if welcoming God's descent to this place, entering the temple we built for him." The temple had not yet been established, but Yesiel was already imagining the scene of God's arrival. Yesiel ascended the mountain and discussed with several ministers of the Yinsai kingdom how to construct this place. It would be the greatest miracle created by the Yinsai kingdom, the most precious gift they could offer to God. "In the God-given city, my father's statue guarded God." Yesiel continued, "Here, my father and I will guard God's palace together." Finally, they reached the mountain summit, where the air was thin, and fierce winds howled. But standing here, it felt as if one could take in the entire world at a glance. This feeling reminded Yesiel of the scene when he first climbed the Pyramid Temple in his youth. The view here was even more expansive, and the mountain's grandeur surpassed that of the pyramid. "This is the place, right here. Level the entire mountaintop, then build a temple here, the most magnificent and luxurious structure in the world. Apart from the priests serving God, thousands of people should guard God here forever." The excited Yesiel had even thought of a name for this temple. Looking at the floating clouds around him, once this temple was completed, it would undoubtedly appear to be situated atop the clouds when viewed from the mountain's base. Let's call it the Sky Temple. The Sky Temple that Yesiel wanted to build was more like a city than a palace. Yesiel was very satisfied with this place. He fantasized that after building the city here, he could also gain God's favor like his father. So be it. This place must be built as soon as possible, within 5 years. It must be completed within 5 years. A minister raised his head. 5 years? Yesiel asked in a tone that brooked no argument, "Can't it be done?" The minister hurriedly nodded. No problem, king. In 5 years, you will surely see this sky temple. The king seemed a bit impatient. Everyone knew that such a massive project would undoubtedly be time-consuming and laborious. Building a city was easy, but the Sky Temple was no ordinary city. The numerous exquisite statues that required meticulous carving, the luxurious palaces, the unimaginably magnificent God's Cup Garden, and other structures would require a large number of highly skilled craftsmen working day and night. Just Yesiel's whimsical idea of excavating the mountain walls to carve out statues of the king's hundreds of meters high was already unimaginably demanding in terms of effort and time. But at this moment, no one dared to speak up. The current king was different from the former king. Yesiel possessed the adventurous courage and grand vision that his father lacked. He dared to venture deep into the sea to establish the first underwater city and led dozens of people to explore new land routes. It was precisely because of these qualities that he could achieve what he had accomplished today. However, Yesiel did not have his father's tolerance and benevolence. Those who dared to offend or disparage him would be executed by his order. To promulgate the legal code and enforce it, he had already sent many trilobite men to the guillotine, including even some from the royal family. It was also because of this that his decrees could be carried out everywhere. However, as Yesiel was no longer young and had begun to decline from his prime, especially with the passing of his sister, he realized that his own death was inevitable. Yesiel grew more impatient. He felt that he had many things left unfinished, and the years and death were like a terrifying shadow chasing him from behind. With a single order from Yesiel, the king of the Yinsai kingdom, the entire Yinsai kingdom quickly sprang into action. The entire kingdom acted according to his will. Tens of thousands of trilobite men trekked hundreds of miles to be dispatched here to build the sky temple dedicated to God. Among them was a fusion monster in the form of a land-suitable drilling worm and a newly promoted high priest of God. 4 years later, Sky Temple, 2 lifelike giant statues, hundreds of meters tall, appeared on the cliffs. A celestial stairway led from the mountain base all the way to the summit, connecting to the temple floating above the clouds. The mountaintop was entirely leveled by a drilling worm-shaped fusion monster. The Sky Temple and the city where those serving God resided were built on this platform. The temple was several dozen meters high and utterly luxurious. Except for the main structure's stone, which was quarried on site, many parts used rare stones and treasures mined from the sea. These had to be transported from hundreds of miles away or even farther. A fusion monster was even arranged to regularly transport these materials. Yesiel also found a flawless pure white stone from the seabed and personally carved the statue of God Yinsai, which was also pulled to the foot of the mountain today. This was a miraculous construction and engineering project that could only be completed by mobilizing the power of fusion monsters and priests. High on the cliffs, hundreds of trilobite men climbed without any protective measures to carve the statues. In the distance, on another side, there were many other trilobite men's figures. A trilobite man waved his hand weakly, unaware that the tool in his hand had already fallen. His head swayed, and he finally fell from the heights in a daze. His body shattered upon impact. Someone fell again. It's Luo. The other trilobite men craftsmen beside him were not surprised at all, they had even grown accustomed to it. This was already the 4th incident today. To build this sky temple, dozens or even nearly 100 people died of exhaustion, falls, or being crushed every month. This month was even more maddening. To meet the deadline, the supervisors went crazy, forcing them to work. In just half a month, more than 100 people had lost their lives on this mountain. Seeing someone fall, their faces were devoid of expression. Today, it was someone else's turn, tomorrow, it would be theirs. Perhaps tomorrow, or maybe the day after. Below the Sky Temple, on the heights, a white-boned trilobite man of the royal family was also very anxious, yelling at a group of trilobite men nobles in charge of the temple's construction. Hurry up, even faster, there's only 1 year left. It must be completed within this year. The one in charge of the construction here was Yesiel's nephew, showing how much importance Yesiel attached to the temple's construction. Yesiel, the king of wisdom, was eager for quick success, and those below him stopped at nothing to cater to him. The endless oppression and the daily rising death toll finally caused the trilobite men, commoners and craftsmen building the Sky Temple to revolt. At midnight, a figure snuck into a room and smashed the skull of that royal trilobite man with a stone hammer with a bone handle. Even with the powerful wisdom power, they were fragile and vulnerable in their sleep. Hundreds and thousands of people poured in from outside, slaughtering the trilobite men, corpse soldiers guarding them and the nobles, killing them all. All the trilobite men, commoners and craftsmen stood on the steps, roaring and even weeping. Dead. They're all dead. We're free. Let's hurry and leave. We'll return to the sea. Only by killing that royal trilobite man could they escape from here. Otherwise, if this royal trilobite man with a Rue beast discovered their escape, they would never be able to evade pursuit within 100 miles, no matter how fast they ran. Roar. While everyone was celebrating and cheering, a 20 to 30 meter long giant beast drilled out from the darkness, roaring furiously and attacking all life. The strong craftsman who had killed the royal trilobite man's face changed drastically. He looked at the demonic shadow in the darkness and spoke with a trembling voice. Not good. The Rue beast is out of control. The fusion monster giant beast, having lost control, squirmed and crushed down from the heights. It was unknown how many people it had crushed and devoured along the way. A section of the building collapsed, and huge boulders rolled from the heights towards the mountain base. A stone pillar over 20 meters high directly smashed into a covered statue at the foot of the mountain. Boom! The statue of God Yinsai placed at the foot of the mountain turned into a pile of rubble. Everyone fell silent, and only the roars of the giant beast could be heard. Even the leaders of the craftsmen who dared to kill the royal trilobite man during the rebellion felt as if the sky had collapsed. They looked at the white rubble, once like beautiful jade, now unrecognizable. But they knew what these stones once represented. No, how could this happen? We didn't do this. We didn't do this. What they opposed and hated were those aristocrats who drove them to desperation, but they never thought they would commit such a blasphemous act against God. 33. Yesiel stared at the collapsed divine statue, his entire body trembling. He stood at the foot of the stone steps, his fists tightly clenched. How dare you? His first sentence was barely audible, but it was followed by a furious roar. How dare you blaspheme against God? The fleeing craftsmen and those who had built the temple were all captured and brought back, kneeling before the lake, awaiting their miserable fate. All struggles and resistance were futile before Yesiel, who wore the crown of wisdom. The craftsman leader who had personally killed the royal trilobite man looked at the tall figure wearing the crown and said with a bitter laugh, "To satisfy your own desires, you do it in the name of God. God is God, and you are you. King Yesiel, we did not destroy the statue of God. Yinsai, it was God's anger towards you." He spread his arms wide, facing the sky. King, do you see? God does not wish to accept your faith. No matter how high a temple you build or how precious the offerings you present, it cannot stop God's disdain for you. The craftsman leader seemed to already know his fate and end. He directed his anguish and cries towards the lofty royal bloodline. Perhaps we were all truly born with sin, the original sin of desire, killing, and tyranny, so God expelled us from the God-permitted paradise. Otherwise, why is it that as soon as we leave God's feet, we begin to fight, kill, and deceive, endlessly walking the path of original sin? Only King Redlichia was God's true firstborn, the true king of wisdom. The craftsman leader's words directly pierced Yesiel's heart. The king, enraged and terrified, turned around and looked at him with eyes full of extreme anger. Blasphemer! I will not kill you. God and King Redlichia are merciful, and today, I will also mercifully spare you. But you and your descendants will all become slaves, forever slaves. Kneeling below, the craftsman leader felt his mind slowly sinking into chaos. Yesiel's words were like a heavenly decree. His wisdom power as the king of wisdom was a divine punishment that no wise being could resist. With all his strength, he shouted, "The one who blasphemed against God is you. It is you, King Yesiel. You are not worthy to wear the crown of wisdom, not worthy to possess King Redlichia's." Before he could finish, his words abruptly ceased. For the first time, Yesiel used his wisdom power as the king of wisdom on a large scale. He stretched out his hand, pointing at the thousands of trilobite men kneeling before him. Light and shadows flowed from his fingertips, and in an instant, the eyes of all the kneeling trilobite men became hollow. Their self-consciousness was distorted at the root, their memories thoroughly modified, turning them into slaves who could only obey orders. At the same time, the mark of the royal sin appeared on the bone armor of their foreheads. This was the mark of a slave. This mark would be inherited through their bloodline. Their descendants, generation after generation, would be unable to escape the fate of slavery. They could never erase the imprint left on them by the wisdom power of the King of Wisdom through their own efforts. When Redlichia first used his wisdom power on a large scale, it was in the hope that future generations would inherit his covenant and oath with God. Yesiel, on the other hand, used it to punish the subjects who opposed him. A Yinsai kingdom noble behind him stepped forward in trepidation and knelt before Yesiel, asking, King, should we continue building the Sky Temple? The out-of-control fusion monster had destroyed a large portion of the construction. The divine stones and the statue personally carved by the king, which had taken years to find, were all destroyed. Moreover, with so many skilled craftsmen having their memories and wills distorted and turned into slaves, it was definitely impossible to complete on schedule, and even with another 4 years, it would be difficult. Some of the rare treasures, once lost, could not be found again by searching the seabed. Those were the Yinsai Kingdom's treasures accumulated over decades. Once gone, they were truly gone. Yesiel didn't even look at him. Of course we continue building. And it must be built even better, even more perfectly. This time, no mistakes are allowed. The noble's body was trembling. He asked, stuttering, King, may I ask when it will be completed? The king, who had been so impatient before, suddenly became less aggressive. Completed within 10 years. He paused for a moment. Aside from these slaves and the craftsmen already recruited and ready to be brought over, do not recruit any more in the near future. With that, he turned and left, riding his fusion monster, with hundreds of guards closely following. After venting his anger, Yesiel suddenly felt an immense coldness throughout his body. The other party's words were like nails embedded in his heart. Could all of this truly be God's wrath? He asked himself, asked his heart that devoutly believed in God. Oh, God, have I truly done wrong? Impossible. I have faith in God. I make offerings to God. What wrong have I done? Yesiel was at a loss. He did not know if what he had done was right or wrong. He found it hard to understand. Could having faith in God also be wrong? Could punishing those who blasphemed against God also be wrong? He was not like his father, who could always be at God's feet, constantly receiving God's guidance. He possessed his father Redlichia's power but not his father Redlichia's divine favor. In the distant sea, a large group of terrifying beings from the deep sea trenches passed through the surface and entered the sea area belonging to the trilobite men, snatching the scattered ancestral fish like hungry wolves. They had insect-like shells, with their entire elongated lower bodies wrapped in soft shells, resembling shrimp tails. Their upper bodies were similar to trilobite men, but while trilobite men had bone armor, theirs was a kind of soft shell armor. Their 2 arms no longer had flexible hands but had turned into 2 large spikes. On the sea surface, the Yinsai Kingdom's subjects in charge of herding the fish finally discovered these beings. Seeing the dense swarm of monsters rushing out. What? A sharp voice erupted, what are these things? An old man immediately recognized what they were. They are the sinful people. The sinful people punished by God. They have rushed out from the demonic abyss. They hadn't fled far before these monsters caught up to them. The shrimp tail-like lower bodies of the other party were more suited for dashing and roaming in the water. Their spike-like arms pierced through the chests of the trilobite men, instantly killing them on the spot. These monsters were indiscriminate in their hunger and devoured the trilobite men on the spot. The scene was bloody and horrifying. These monsters were none other than the descendants of Ents and Boon from the past. They no longer possessed the advanced intelligence of trilobite men, only the instinctual coordination of beasts. They had no language and could not speak. But when the tentacles on their heads touched, they could communicate their intentions. Thousands upon thousands of sinful people gathered together, like a terrifying monster army. Initially, there were only nearly 100 sinful people, but over the decades, they had proliferated madly in the demonic abyss, and their numbers had grown to nearly 10,000. Now, the demonic abyss could no longer accommodate their survival, so they swarmed out and rushed towards this place. 34. Yesiel City. Nearly 10,000 monsters surrounded Yesiel City and engaged in slaughter and fierce battles with the soldiers guarding the city. Light shone from the sea surface into the depths, and corpses floated up from the seabed. These sinful people possessed immense combat strength. They were frenzied and bloodthirsty. Although the guarding soldiers had undergone training, their stable and peaceful lives made them no match for these monsters that had killed their way out from the demonic abyss of the deep sea. Coupled with the monsters, vast numbers, the defenders of Yesiel City were forced to retreat in defeat, fleeing from the sea surface into the city. The Lord of Yesiel City, riding a bizarre shrimp, led a group of people in fierce combat against these monsters on the sea surface. In the end, they were surrounded, and the Lord was killed by a monster over 2 meters tall. Along with his bizarre shrimp mount, they became food for the monsters. The guards under the Lord's command shouted for the Lord's son to leave. We can't hold them off. Yes'Isle City is done for. Go quickly and tell the king. The descendants of Ents, the blasphemer against God, have returned. The Lord's son, frightened out of his wits by the dense swarm of monsters on the distant sea surface, fled towards the distance for his life, while the guards blocked the pursuing monsters for him. As the guards were slaughtered to the last man, thousands upon thousands of monsters rushed towards the underwater city and stormed in. Slaughter descended, and none survived. Yes'Isle City had fallen. The monsters occupied this prosperous underwater domain, seizing their fishing grounds and everything else. Under the moonlight, several wounded trilobite men crawled out from the seabed. They hurriedly climbed ashore and entered the god-descended city. Yes'Isle was awakened in the middle of the night and walked into the grand palace to receive the Lord's son, who was also one of Yes'Isle's descendants and a member of the royal bloodline. He knelt in the great hall, weeping, and the first words he uttered were, "King, Yes'Isle City is gone." Yes'Isle immediately stood up and looked at him solemnly. "Gone? What happened to Yes'Isle City? Where is your father?" The other recounted the tragic events that had occurred in Yes'Isle City, his voice trembling as if he dared not recall the horrific scene. "Father is dead, eaten alive by those sinful people. The entire Yes'Isle City, I estimate no one survived. King, those sinful people exiled by God have crawled out from the demonic abyss at the bottom of the sea again." Yes'Isle's pupils dilated. So many years had passed, and he had thought there would be no more dealings with Ents and Boon. He never expected to encounter them again in this manner. The ministers of the Yinsai kingdom beside him immediately stepped forward. "King, we must retake Yes'Isle City. It is our most important underwater city. We have several other cities and numerous villages in the deep sea. Once these sinful people gain a foothold, they will all be threatened." Yes'Isle had no intention of abandoning Yes'Isle City, but these sinful people were different from the subjects of Yinsai. These deep abyss sinners had been stripped of the advanced wisdom bestowed by God, degenerating into beings like trilobites and ancestral fish, their bloodline almost no longer belonging to the trilobite men. The power of the King of Wisdom was also helpless against them. Yes'Isle pondered for a moment and then settled on a strategy. Send a few priests with Ru beasts to reclaim Yes'Isle City. Drive out these sinful people and force them back into the abyss. Although the reappearance of the sinful people shocked Yes'Isle, it was not a significant crisis for him. However, the occurrence of this incident gave Yes'Isle an ominous feeling. Just recently, an accident had occurred at the temple being built for God, and even the divine statue he had personally carved for God had collapsed. Now, the sinful people punished by God had once again appeared in the territory of the Yinsai kingdom, as if God was truly bringing down calamity. Several priests of God rode on bizarre shrimp, treading the waves, with the leading one standing atop a Ru beast. They saw the rampaging monsters in the sea from afar, and the leading royal priest showed a contemptuous look. Hideous monsters should stay obediently in the abyss. The colossal creature, dozens of meters long, descended upon Yes'Isle City. Terrifying tentacles extended hundreds of meters from the seawater, strangling, tearing apart, and piercing those monsters one by one. In the ocean, no one could oppose them. The mythical life-form Ru beast, the servant of God and the minion of Shelley. With the appearance of the fusion monsters, the monsters occupying Yes'Isle City fled in panic, not daring to look back. But it did not end there. The monsters scattered into the ocean, fleeing whenever they saw a fusion monster. However, they specifically plundered and attacked villages and cities that lacked the protection of fusion monsters. One or two fusion monsters could guard a city but were unable to protect such a vast sea area, let alone drive them out and exterminate them. Moreover, these monsters reproduced at an extremely rapid rate, especially after entering the fishing grounds of the Yinsai kingdom and gaining access to food. The more monsters were killed, the more they multiplied, and the trilobite men were exhausted from fleeing. In this sea area, the subjects under Yes'Isle and the descendants of Ents began their fateful confrontation in this unexpected manner. Hatred still spread through their bloodlines, and the slaughter never ceased. In the God's Cup garden of the royal palace. This indoor garden had now turned into a sea of golden flowers, filled with sun cups carefully nurtured by the high priest Shlode. Shlode waved his hand, and the water in the basin he held was sprinkled into the soil. This was the power of a high priest. While checking on the sun cups, Shlode accidentally got pricked by the root system of a sun cup. Hiss! He let out a cry of pain. Then he discovered that the roots of this sun cup were actually drilling into his bone armor and flesh, as if trying to bore into his flesh and grow together with him. Shlode had a sudden realization. Could it be that the true usage of the Sun Cup was not merely inhaling its pollen, but allowing it to merge with one's body, fully mastering the power of this God-made object? Schlode had long discovered that the Sun Cup was a half-plant, half-animal existence. Now, seeing it drilling into his flesh, he further confirmed his speculation. A God-made object. I knew it wasn't that simple. Schlode was extremely excited and immediately began researching in this direction. He believed that he had not only become the first high priest but might also pioneer a path to utilize divine power. After numerous attempts and constant communication with the Sun Cup using his wisdom power, Schlode actually succeeded in planting the Sun Cup into his own body, making it a part of himself. Rumble. The stone gate opened, and Schlode walked out from the God's Cup garden. His appearance had completely changed. Roots had penetrated through the cracks in Schlode's bone armor, taking root in his flesh, delving into his organs, and fully integrating with him. This was invisible inside the body, but on the outside. The flower cup of the Sun Cup on his shoulder swayed in the wind. It was bizarre, yet possessed a strange beauty. Divine technique. Realm of illusion. Schlode waved his hand, and the Sun Cup protruding from his shoulder bloomed, scattering golden fluorescence within a radius of several dozen meters. Anyone who caught the fragrance of the flowers would fall into the illusion created by Schlode. He could directly affect the surroundings within several dozen meters, and even priests of God could not escape the illusions he conjured. This was a power comparable to the Rue Beast, a different path to strength. Schlode was extremely excited. He felt he had found the correct path. Too powerful. This power is too immense. This is the true power bestowed upon us by God. However, a priest beside him looked at Schlode with concern. This bizarre form seemed quite abnormal. The priest hesitantly asked, "High Priest Schlode, is this really okay? The Sun Cups are not inanimate objects but living beings. The power bestowed by God may not be meant to be used in this way." Schlode, hearing the others questioning of him, immediately looked over with discontent. "Do you need to speculate about God's will? I am the one who received God's revelation." 35. The Sky Temple was finally completed after many obstacles, taking over a decade to fully construct when including the previous time spent. This temple dedicated to God, which had consumed a significant portion of the Yinsai Kingdom's resources and Yesile's efforts, seemed to stand in the sky, just like its name. It was an unimaginably great wonder, a palace fit only for God and his servants to reside in. Yesile raised his head, his gaze piercing through the sea of clouds to see a corner of the Sky Temple. It's finally completed. With a heart filled with unease, he passed through the stairway-like path. On the mountain arms on both sides, statues hundreds of meters tall were carved, two kings kneeling on one knee, welcoming the descent of God. This path could only be traversed by the kings of Yinsai and God. Others who wished to ascend the mountain had to take a small path on the side. At this moment, Yesile walked along this path upwards, excitement and unease surging in his chest simultaneously, making him feel somewhat breathless. He looked up at the Sky Temple with longing and murmured, "Oh, God! Do you see? This is the gift I present to you. Like my father Redlichia, I devoutly believe in you." He stepped into the temple, standing expectantly in the center of the grand hall. Inside the temple, apart from the exquisite upright statues, there was nothing else. In the first year, the king went to the Sky Temple to listen to God's oracle, but God did not descend. In the second year, Yesile knelt beneath the divine statue. "God, if you hear my prayer, please grant me revelation. Yesile listens to your will, accepting your guidance and arrangement for my destiny." The king once again went to the Sky Temple to listen to God's oracle, but God did not come. In the 10th year, the sun in the sky rose from the east and set on the other side, the stars appeared in the darkness. In the darkness, the gradually aging Yesile knelt alone in the great hall. God did not come. Yesile looked up at the divine statue in the Sky Temple with despair and helplessness. Unlike the statue his father had carved, which was mysterious and warm like the light of the stars, this statue he had personally sculpted was majestic and grand. "Have I truly done wrong? Oh, God, if I am wrong, give me a sign or punish me." He knelt beneath the divine statue, his voice choking. Please don't abandon us." At this moment, Schlode, the high priest of the Sky Temple, suddenly emerged and came up behind Yesile. He humbly hunched his back and knelt behind Yesile. The high priest said reassuringly, "King, God has not abandoned us, he has always been here." Yesile turned his head. "You heard God's revelation again." Schlode looked at the divine statue with extreme fanaticism. "God granted me divine techniques, this is God's revelation. The reason God is unwilling to descend is because of the sinful people, those who were punished by God into the demonic abyss but escaped on their own. They fled from the demonic abyss and disturbed God's domain. Only by eradicating them and driving them back into the abyss will God once again favor us. Having been the high priest for so many years, controlling this sky temple and the majestic city, he had become a prestigious figure second only to the king in the Yinsai kingdom. His demeanor had become mysterious and ethereal, and his speech had become lofty and bewitching. Time and time again, he proclaimed himself to be the receiver of God's revelation, claiming to be the priest chosen by God. Naturally, what he could not accept the most was the notion that the subjects of Yinsai had been abandoned by God. If the subjects of Yinsai had been abandoned by God, then what was he, the high priest of the Sky Temple? What was he, the one who received God's revelation? He could not bear it. Guards rushing from the God-descended city brought news from the distant sea. The guards reported gravely, "King, the sinful people killed the Lord of Xylong City, and more than half of the city's subjects were massacred." By the time, the guard was extremely heartbroken. It seemed some people he knew had died. By the time the high priest rushed over, those sinful people had all fled. With anguish in his voice, the guard lamented, "King, we have lost too many people." The sinful people rampaged in the sea like wild beasts, forcibly seizing the fishing grounds of the trilobite men and attacking their cities. Over the years, the fusion monsters had slaughtered countless sinful people, but they had become even more rampant. Moreover, those sinful people had become increasingly cunning and fierce, retaliating by massacring the subjects of the Yinsai kingdom, leading to the current situation. After all, there were only 7 fusion monsters in total, most of them scattered in the coastal cities, making it difficult to deeply suppress the sinful people. The subjects of the Yinsai kingdom became increasingly afraid to venture into the distant sea, fleeing back to the near shore or ascending to the continental cities one by one. They gradually lost control of the distant sea. If this continued, perhaps in the future, the ocean would no longer belong to the Yinsai kingdom but to these sinful people. A minister beside him said, "That is the sea area near the God-given land. If it is occupied by the sinful people punished by God." He did not say it out loud, but Yesiel knew this would be a massive blow to his prestige. At this moment, High Priest Shlode once again stepped forward to express his opinion. Shlode declared, "King, it is precisely these sinful people who have disturbed God, causing him to refuse to descend upon the Sky Temple. If we can drive out these sinful people in the eyes of God, God will surely see it." Yesiel turned his head to look at Shlode. He had originally wanted to say something else, but after observing some details, he suddenly asked, "Shlode, why haven't you aged?" Shlode spoke in his bewitching and mysterious tone, "My king, it is because of the divine techniques bestowed by God, the power of the Sun Cup." The Sun Cup on his shoulder swayed, casting golden light and shadows on his body, making him appear mysterious and sacred. He had not known originally, but recently he had discovered the secret within. After merging with the Sun Cup, he himself had become a life form between plant and animal. The Sun Cup had extended his lifespan. He estimated that his lifespan would exceed that of ordinary trilobite men by a significant margin. He had long intended to showcase his divine techniques to the King of Wisdom to gain greater rights and recognition. He urged Yesiel once more, "King, this is a divine technique, the power of the God's Cup. The Sun Cup is not only the power bestowed by God to perfect our wisdom abilities but also grants us the sublimation of life. Only by fully integrating with the Sun Cup can we obtain the true power granted by God. This is a miracle bestowed by God Yinsai and represents that his glory has never left us." Yesiel's body was growing increasingly frail. He was no longer as healthy as before, able to easily traverse the sea and engage in combat. Yesiel had originally been somewhat disgusted by the power obtained by implanting foreign objects into one's body, but at this moment, he was somewhat tempted. Is it truly possible? Shlode demonstrated his power to him, the symbiotic power of the Sun Cup and the divine technique realm of illusion. Drink from the Sun Cup, and you can obtain divine power. Merge with the Sun Cup, and you can be with God. He unleashed his illusion technique, transforming the hall into an ocean and the stone slabs into water surfaces. Shlode walked on the water surface and knelt before Yesiel. "King, look, this is the power God has bestowed upon us. Like the bestowing of power, it is a divine technique originating from God. You are the king of Yinsai, the power bestowed by God rightfully belongs to you. As long as you are willing." 36. Yesiel's grandson, Eli, had grown from a child to a young man, and this time he accompanied his grandfather to the Sky Temple to worship God. It was clear that Yesiel was grooming him as the future king. As the sun set, the elderly Yesiel, hunched over and leaning on his scepter, strolled by the lake at the foot of the mountain. He suddenly paused, gazing at the setting sun. A group of trilobite men were pouring fish fry into the lake. When they grew up, they would become food for the priests and servants of God in the Sky Temple. Yesiel recited the covenant between God and King Redlichia, the divine words inscribed on the crown of wisdom. Because of loneliness, God created Redlichia, the king of wisdom. Because of Redlichia's loneliness, God then created the trilobite men. Thus began the race, and from this moment, the kingdom was established. Eli could see that his grandfather was hesitating whether to initiate an all-out war against the sinful people. To thoroughly cleanse the growing sinful people, it was estimated that all 7 fusion monsters would need to be deployed, along with tens of thousands of people, in order to drive them all back into the dark demonic abyss. This would be the greatest war since the birth of wise beings. Even the proud and arrogant King Yesiel had to be cautious. He looked at his reflection in the lake water. I have aged too. After standing in a daze for a long time, he suddenly asked, Eli, do you think this war should be fought? Eli was stunned for a moment, then fell into contemplation. He suddenly recalled another chapter of the Redlichia covenant that the king had just recited and slowly recited it. God said, I am the God who created you. And you are their king. Eli immersed himself in the mood of these words, imagining the scene at that time when God stood on the shore, watching the sunset and the birth of the trilobite race. How similar it was to the current scene. Perhaps, when God spoke these words, he was telling the great King Redlichia. God created him, hoping that he would become a great king, shepherding the living beings in place of God. That is the duty of a king. Eli looked at his grandfather and said cautiously, King, perhaps it's time to reconsider. Didn't you say that everything is arranged by God? Perhaps the more we do, the more we are going against God's will. Yesiel neither agreed nor disagreed. He had heard many people's interpretations of the Redlichia covenant. Just like Shlode, these people had never even seen God's shadow, yet they speculated about God's thoughts. You may be right, Yesiel acknowledged, but Redlichia also said. God doesn't care. I care. His eyes blazed with anger. How can I allow these sinful people to defile God's domain? With every step they take into the sea, it is a blasphemy against God. How can I allow them to occupy the ocean? It was granted by God to King Redlichia. It was granted by God to the subjects of the Yinsai kingdom. The elderly Yesiel finally made his decision. He decided to personally lead the expedition to eradicate those sinful people who blasphemed against God in his presence and drive them back into the demonic abyss forever. The sea area of the God-given land must never be allowed to be occupied or approached by these sinful people. But to achieve this, he needed a strong physique. Eli looked at his grandfather, whose aged face was filled with an almost manic obsession. His gaze focused on the crown. Perhaps this crown not only possessed the power of the King of Wisdom. It was also a curse. Originating from the first generation King of Wisdom, from the obsession of Redlichia, the first mythical wise being. Yesiel summoned the high priest of the Sky Temple and told him that he was prepared to accept the divine technique of the God's Cup. Since it is a divine technique bestowed by God, the king should master it. Shlode looked at the king with excitement. The king's recognition of his divine technique also meant that his position as the high priest of the Sky Temple and his identity as the receiver of God's revelation were even more unquestionable. The high priest declared reverently, King, your wisdom and brilliance are unmatched. By using the mighty power granted to you by God, you will punish those who betray and blaspheme against him. God's favor will surely descend upon you, and the God-given land and his kingdom will surely open their doors to you once more. In the Sky Temple, in the presence of God, Yesiel knelt at the feet of God and accepted the power of the Sun Cup. Shlode and 2 other priests of the Sky Temple presided over the ceremony for the king, planting the Sun Cup into Yesiel's body. Oh, great God, I will fill your God's cup and drink deeply of the power you have bestowed. May your divine power mold my mortal body, may my faith forever linger beneath your altar. Yesiel watched as the dense network of roots continuously extended, taking root in his own flesh and blood. As pain permeated his mind, a powerful strength flowed into his body, making him feel as if he had returned to his youth. Ah! Yesiel's entire body floated up, hovering in midair within the temple. Within a radius of 100 meters, golden fluorescence immediately filled the area, and everyone was drawn into Yesile's consciousness and illusions, even the most powerful Shlode could not resist. It was the most profound scene in Yesile's memory. The majestic being standing on the altar, transcending time and years. He did not even dare to muster the courage to look up. Others who saw the god were even more frenzied, losing all strength and collapsing to the ground. Unconscious. Tens of thousands of people, armed with bone spears, bone forks, capture nets, and various weapons, successively submerged into the sea area where Xylom City was located, surrounding it so tightly from the surface to the seabed that not a drop of water could escape. The priests riding Bizarre Shrimp were their leaders, and at the forefront of the army, all 7 fusion monsters were deployed in a line. Yesile stood atop the fusion monster Nini. Under the sun, his body seemed to emit a golden glow, and the golden flower cup on his shoulder was dazzlingly bright. He felt great, as if he had returned to his youth. At that time, he galloped between the sea and the abyss, disregarding all dangers and difficulties. He raised his scepter high. "Oh, God, watch over me. I will once again bring divine punishment upon those sinful people who blaspheme against God." Yesile had already formulated a plan beforehand, repeatedly allowing these monsters to erode the towns of the Yinsai kingdom, gradually gathering the scattered monsters in the sea to this area, and then mobilizing the army to surround them. Kill. All the soldiers and priests of the Yinsai kingdom, above and below the sea surface, sprang into action, pouncing on the sinful people who dared to occupy their towns and plunder their fishing grounds. Capture nets ensnared the powerful bodies of the monsters, restraining their naturally armed hands and powerful tails, and then other soldiers pierced their bodies with bone spears. The monsters swung their spike-like hands, tearing apart and killing one Yinsai kingdom soldier after another. But with the appearance of the fusion monsters and priests, the tide turned in one direction. It was a massacre, and the power of the 7 fusion monsters and high priests was unrivaled. 37. The slaughter stretched from day to night until the warm seawater turned icy cold, until the pure blue sea was stained crimson, and until corpses floated everywhere, both above and below the water's surface. Nearly 20,000 monsters were killed, leaving only a few thousand remaining. Fear gripped the monsters. They gathered their last strength to find a weak point in the encirclement and broke through. Instinctively, they fled in the direction they had come, towards that dark and frigid oceanic trench. Yesile, flushed with victory, gave chase. He laughed triumphantly as he summoned his warriors and followers, just as he once rallied the valiant men of the god-descended city to set out for the land of their origin. Pursue them. Drive them back to the demonic abyss. The sinful people belong in eternal darkness, never to see the light of day again. While the power of the other high priests could at most move a stone the size of a head, Yesile could not only levitate his own body but also ride the wind and soar through the sky. Yesile controlled his body to fly high above, dashing at the forefront of the army. Below, the 7 fusion monsters parted the waves as they surged forward, followed by tens of thousands of Yinsai kingdom soldiers chasing his silhouette. He felt exhilarated, driving the sinful people until they had nowhere to go, neither in the heavens above nor in the depths below. Recklessly exploiting the power of his own bloodline and the Sun Cup, he reached the unfathomable edge of the oceanic trench. Yet he failed to notice the changes occurring in the Sun Cup that had symbiotically merged with him. The battlefield extended to the deep-sea abyss, stretching the front line to its limit. Yesile, determined to prevent a large number of sinful people from escaping into the abyss, charged to the very front. He gradually separated from the main force, accompanied only by a few royal guards and a starfish-like fusion monster. However, his unrivaled and overwhelming strength filled him with fearlessness. Not far away on the seabed loomed a bottomless trench. Yesile walked on the water's surface, charging into the monster crowd alone, allowing more than a dozen monsters to surround and attack him. With a wave of his hand, he stirred up giant waves, knocking 7 or 8 monsters away. In midair, these monsters shattered into a mess of flesh. A sinful person over 2 meters tall charged straight at Yesile. It leapt from the water's surface, extending its arms to stab at him. The monster opened its terrifying mouthparts but couldn't make a single sound. Yet one could feel its fury. Witnessing so many of its kin die before its eyes, even the dullest of them felt an incomparable sense of desolation. However, no matter how enraged they were, it couldn't change the vast difference in strength between them and the king. Yesile reached out his hand and grasped the creature in the void. It was like pinching an insect. The king of Yinsai, adorned with his crown, carefully observed his foe. For a body to grow to this extent, it must be a direct descendant of their bloodline. The thought that such a monster once shared the same blood as himself made Yesiel nauseous. So hideous. Descendants of patricidal sons. He clenched his fingers. The monster burst in the sky, its entrails splattering into the sea. This scene was witnessed by the tens of thousands of Yinsai Kingdom soldiers rushing over from afar. At this moment, Yesiel was the embodiment of divinity. My king, king of wisdom, the God-given power is unstoppable. Slay all these sinful people. The nearby royal guards surfaced and cheered. This didn't feel like a war but more like a feast. Or rather, a performance dedicated to the gods. The sun cup on Yesiel's shoulder grew increasingly radiant, releasing a golden light that truly resembled the sun. He activated the sun cup on his shoulder and released the divine technique realm of illusion from above the water's surface. One after another, the monsters lost their way and floated up from the seabed to the surface, where Yesiel struck them down on the spot. They even began to kill each other. Yesiel strolled on the water, effortlessly slaying these sinful people, his footsteps smooth and graceful, as if he were dancing. He felt like the protagonist, presenting the most beautiful performance to the gods. Using the power bestowed upon him by God, he punished the sinners. Ents. Boon. You two blasphemers against God, traitorous patricidal sons. Do you see? This is the might of God. This is God's punishment for you, divine retribution for your sin of patricide. The more he used his power, the stronger the sun cup's influence became. This bizarre flower, called the God's Cup, had never encountered someone with such powerful mythical bloodlines who unleashed their power towards it so unreservedly. Unknowingly, the sun cup on his shoulder grew larger and larger. Finally, it suddenly moved on its own, letting out a hideous screech. Hiss. Yesiel, who had been freely wielding his power, abruptly stopped in his tracks, his expression frozen in an instant. He suddenly lost control of his power and his body, stumbling from the sea surface and plunging into the ocean. What's happening? Yesiel was utterly horrified. His eyes darted sideways to his shoulder. The once beautiful sun cup suddenly split open, transforming into a terrifying maw with fangs that lunged towards Yesiel's head. Yesiel watched helplessly, unable to do anything. Its target was not to kill him but to devour the crown of wisdom on his head, that supreme divine artifact possessing vast mythical power and the authority of the King of Wisdom. Panic seized Yesiel. He roared in his heart but couldn't make a sound. He wanted to summon the fusion monsters on the distant sea surface, but he couldn't even release his wisdom authority. No. Suddenly, a tremendous force struck his back. Bang! It was the sound of a blade piercing through bone armor. At this moment, an enraged monster shot out from under the water and attacked Yesiel. The sharp spike pierced and tore through Yesiel's neck, separating his head from his body, sending it flying into the distance like a ball. The descendants of the patricidal sun dealt a fatal blow to Yesiel, as if the hatred and resentment of their ancestor Ents still lingered in their bones and blood, erupting at this very instant. As the world spun around him. How could this be? Never had Yesiel imagined he would meet such an end. He suddenly recalled Ents's words. Even if banished to the abyss, Ents vowed to return, kill Yesiel, and seize the throne that rightfully belonged to him. Could this also be fate? With a splash, his vision was engulfed by seawater, and his consciousness gradually sank into darkness. He could no longer hear any sound, the entire world fell silent. In a daze, he suddenly saw a tall, warm figure appear before him. The figure stood backlit in the temple, his long shadow stretching across the stone slabs. Oh, Yesiel, only the divine is eternal. No matter how much we gain, we will eventually decay and lose it all. Wild joy surged in Yesiel's heart, and his spirit instantly became invigorated, like the last ray of light at sunset. Father, you've come for me. Have you come to take me back to God's kingdom? Yesiel heaved a long sigh of relief, as if a lifelong burden had been lifted from his heart. Ah, I knew God would forgive us. He wanted to reach out his hand to grasp his father's, to follow him back to the divine halls. However, at this moment, he suddenly realized that only his head remained. Everything vanished like a dream, along with his consciousness. Yesiel, the second-generation King of Wisdom, was dead. In the bubbling seawater, the crown on his head automatically detached from him and plummeted towards the eternally dark and frigid bottomless oceanic trench. 1,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, until it reached the bottomless abyss that even fusion monsters struggled to attain. The wisdom kingship belonging to the trilobite men was lost. 38. Yesiel, the second-generation King of Wisdom, was dead, but the slaughter had not ceased. More sinful people were driven back to this demonic abyss from afar, their silhouettes gliding beneath the water's surface. The soldiers of the Yinsai kingdom, unaware that their king had perished, continued to battle fiercely against these monsters, hunting down the sinful people punished by God. All in the name of the divine. Only the hundreds of guards nearby witnessed Yesiel's death. They froze in unison, their gazes fixed on that stretch of sea. A headless corpse floated on the water's surface, a bizarre golden flower blooming atop it. The king is dead. The royal guards couldn't believe the scene before their eyes. The king is dead. Someone dropped their bone spear, seemingly numb even as a charging sinful person pierced their chest, staring blankly at Yesiel's corpse. How is this possible? This can't be. Everyone went mad, as if the pillar of their faith had collapsed. After a brief paralysis, everyone sprang into frenzied action. Even though Yesiel was dead, they still rushed over desperately, wanting to reclaim his body. Hiss. The sun cup emitted a sharp screech, a wave of mythical power belonging to a high priest sweeping across, instantly halting the movements of all Yinsai kingdom soldiers and sinful people within several dozen meters. On the tall, headless corpse, the bizarre flower with sharp fangs and teeth writhed on its stem. Having failed to devour Yesiel's head and the crown of wisdom, the sun cup furiously shattered the sinful person who had killed Yesiel. Its roots, entrenched within Yesiel's body, shredded his flesh and crushed his bone armor, consuming every last bit of his body and mythical blood. At this moment, the sun cup had completely transformed into another species. It had truly awakened. Simultaneously, the sun cups within the bodies of the other high priests of the Sky Temple scattered across the sea also began to rebel. Those foolish enough to incorporate this bizarre entity, an existence straddling the line between animal and plant, into their bodies to gain power not their own were destined to face the consequences at this very moment. The first to suffer was Shlode, the high priest of the Sky Temple. He was currently riding a fusion monster on the distant sea surface, leading an encirclement and suppression of hundreds of sinful people. It was he who had repeatedly proposed unleashing divine punishment on the sinful people, and it was he who was now immersed in the slaughter. He raised his hand, laughing maniacally, "Oh, lowly and hideous monsters! You should not exist in this world. God takes pity on the world, granting you the land of the demonic abyss. How dare you defy God's will and crawl out of the abyss?" The insect-like fusion monster beneath his feet opened its gaping maw, swallowing over a dozen sinful people into its belly with a single bite. He prepared to begin his performance once more, proclaiming his noble identity as a receiver of God's revelation in front of everyone. However, the sun cup within his body began to stir, its roots piercing through his chest armor and bursting out of his body. "Sun cup, you dare rebel against me?" Shlode was stunned at first, then rebuked it with all his might. He invoked his wisdom authority, trying to communicate with and control the sun cup. "God bestowed you upon me. I am your master." His first sentence was lofty and arrogant. "God bestowed you upon me. You cannot disobey me." This sentence was already filled with panic and dread. The sun cup within his body was not as powerful as Yesiel's. He could still move with difficulty but could not unleash any divine techniques or mythical power. The roots of the sun cup flower continuously devoured his flesh, bursting through his bone armor. He desperately grasped the stem of the sun cup flower with his hands. "No. No, I am the receiver of God's revelation. God will not abandon me. God will not forsake me." Amidst piercing screams, the sun cup split open into several petals and swallowed his head whole. However, the mutated sun cup met no better fate. The nearby priest of God, upon seeing the situation, immediately commanded the fusion monster to tear it to shreds. But there was no possibility of saving High Priest Shlode. He followed closely in the king's footsteps, dying in this war that would go down in history. Everywhere, one high priest of the Sky Temple after another fell into dire straits. Ah! Screams of agony rang out incessantly. They couldn't fathom why the sun cup would suddenly turn against them. "Oh, God, is this your punishment for us?" Amidst the chaos, a large number of monsters broke through the encirclement and fled into the depths. The slaughter gradually came to an end. Only a little over 1,000 sinful people escaped back to the demonic abyss. The royal guards retrieved the head of Yesiel, the second-generation king of wisdom, from the hands of a few sinful people, but they couldn't find the rest of his body. Even more unsettling, they couldn't find the crown of wisdom. Prince Eli. This is. The guard kneeling on the ground didn't dare finish his sentence before committing suicide in shame right in front of Eli, Yesiel's grandson. Eli stood atop the fusion monster Nini, holding Yesiel's head tightly in his arms. He let out a long wail towards the sky, tears streaming down incessantly. My king, there were no victors in this war. The sinful people suffered a massacre and were once again driven back to the demonic abyss. And the Yinsai kingdom lost its king of wisdom, along with the power of the wisdom kingship bestowed by God. Open double angle bracket Yinsai epic close double angle bracket. Because mortals indulged in slaughter, tyranny, and desire, using the power granted by God to kill and act wantonly, God took back the supreme authority he had bestowed upon King Redlichia. Mortals with original sin were unworthy of wearing the crown of wisdom. From then on, there was no longer a king of wisdom on earth and sea, only a king of Yinsai. The sun cup felt different from before. The sun shining on its body felt very comfortable. It even understood what joy and happiness were, and it knew what danger was. When the other sun cups flaunted and swayed their flowers, only to be torn apart one by the priests and fusion monsters of the Yinsai kingdom, it alone hid itself, drifting with the waves to distant places. The shadow of an island appeared in the distance, and an idea surfaced in its mind. Perhaps it could take root there. The island drew closer and closer. To its delight, it discovered that there were others like it here. A golden sea of flowers swayed from the coast to the distant horizon, as if welcoming their arrival. It wanted to settle down here. It drifted ashore, its roots entwining to form feet as it crawled up. Rustle, rustle. In the flower field, it seemed as if something was walking through. Before it could react, a hand grabbed it. Green eyes locked onto its consciousness, evoking a memory deep within its bloodline with a terrifying aura akin to a demon god. It was so frightened that it didn't even dare to move. Long, long ago, its ancestor had been grasped in the other party's hand just like this. Gurgle. They had left the God-given land and wandered the great sea. From one end of the Yinsai kingdom to the other, then back again from the other end, circling the known world. At this very moment, they had returned to Shelley's hand. Everything had come full circle, as if fate had ordained it so. 39. Shelley held a flower pot in one hand and grasped the captured sun cup in the other. There was no doubt about it. The sun cup she had just caught was far more beautiful than the one in the flower pot. Gurgle. Shelley tossed out the one in the flower pot and planted the newly caught one in its place. Her petite figure passed through the sea of flowers, squeezing beneath the dense sun cup flowers. Bathed in sunlight, the flower cups swayed continuously as she passed, rising and falling like ocean waves. Tap, tap, ascending the steps of the pyramid. Shelley's human form was not tall, so the climbing process felt particularly amusing. With each step, she raised her leg extremely high, as if exerting all her strength, almost grunting with effort, her body swaying from side to side. She arrived at the base of the divine statue and, as she did every day, placed the flower pot on the altar. As if presenting an offering to God. Year after year, day after day. She did this every single day. Just as she was about to climb onto the altar and sit beside God. Suddenly, starlight burst forth from above, and a faint voice emanated from overhead. A very beautiful flower. Shelley looked up. The divine statue radiated ribbons of light like flowing silk, and a shadow cloaked in brilliance slowly emerged from within. The divine had finally awakened. Shelley no longer climbed up and released her grip, standing in place. She widened her eyes, leaning forward with her hands behind her back. Gurgle. Indeed, very much like a fish blowing bubbles. This sight made the luminous figure descending from the altar chuckle. It stood beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned its gaze to the sun cup. The newly born intelligent consciousness within the sun cup could not comprehend the current tender moment. It was already frightened out of its wits. It had just escaped from the clutches of a demon god, only to find itself before another terrifying existence beyond its comprehension. It had never encountered such a horrifying being, one it couldn't even imagine. Its consciousness sensed a towering star standing at the end of time and beyond the universe. That dazzlingly indescribable shadow seemed to traverse from an inconceivably distant existence beyond Earth, using its unfathomable power to shatter the boundaries of time and space and enter the world it inhabited. Hiss. This sound was not intentional. Or rather, it was already too terrified to make any sound, but at this moment, the fear had surpassed its bearable limit, causing it to involuntarily cry out, its body quivering along with it. The sun cup unfurled, its extraordinary power tearing through the air, reverberating and spreading outward. But in the face of God, its power was as if non-existent. He stood there, completely unaffected. However, its reality-altering extraordinary power immediately caught Yin Shen's attention. Or rather, this was precisely the reason he was attracted and awakened. How fortunate. For mythical blood to undergo such a transformation in such a short time could be said to have already exceeded Yin Shen's expectations. As the consciousness within the sun cup trembled in trepidation, swaying the flower cup, Yin Shen placed his hand on the sun cup. Yin Shen's ability to touch it meant that, as he had anticipated, it was also one of his anchors, an existence inheriting the mythical blood. But as for the specifics of what had happened to it, Yin Shen still needed to see the events that had transpired. The previously swaying sun cup instantly froze. Its consciousness fell into complete blankness, unable to feel anything. Yet before Yin Shen's eyes, it was as if time was reversing, and one scene after another continuously unfolded. The Sky Temple, the God's Cup Flower Garden, Yesile, the second-generation King of Wisdom. The destined battle between Yesile's Yinsai Kingdom and the descendants of Ensign Boon, the backlash from the Sun Cup for coveting immortality. Until finally, the Wisdom Kingship was lost in the bottomless sea trench, and the newborn intelligence within the bizarre flower was birthed from Yesile's death. He saw it all. Only then did Yin Shen realize what had transpired during his slumber. Unlike the tranquil God-given land, the outside world had undergone earth-shattering changes. Even Yesile has died. Yin Shen withdrew his hand, his face devoid of any expression. Only his tone carried a hint of sigh and lament. Shelley ran ahead of Yin Shen with a light jog, arriving at the seaside. Yin Shen's figure followed her unhurriedly through the flowers. Shelley stood by the sea, turning her head to look at Yin Shen with her large green eyes, waiting for him to approach. Once Yin Shen reached her, she turned around and transformed into a beam of light, leaping into the ocean. Boom! Massive waves surged. In the blink of an eye, Shelley, who had just been a cute little girl, revealed her true form. It was a colossal monster, 70 to 80 meters tall, with numerous large and small terrifying green eyes rotating, countless tentacles extending from the sea and waving in the sky. The monster carried Yin Shen and departed from the God-given land, just as it had carried him here in the past. Go to the sea trench. Above the vast ocean, Yin Shen's gaze pierced through the trench, seeing the crown of wisdom in the abyss below. With a thought, the crown slowly rose from the dark and frigid depths. Finally, it broke through the surface, floating before Yin Shen. The crown of wisdom emitted a faint glow, accompanied by a soft chime. As if the departed Red Lucia was conversing with Yin Shen through this means. Yin Shen shook his head helplessly. Red Lucia. Since you agreed to let go, then let go completely. There's no need to shackle your descendants anymore. Let everything end here. This is the end. The crown of wisdom radiated a gentle light, drifting towards Yin Shen bit by bit. It seemed to want to be placed upon Yin Shen's head, but ultimately, it didn't dare approach out of reverence. As if it felt unworthy of being worn by God. Finally, it shrank in size, fitting onto Yin Shen's right middle finger. Like a black ring, Yin Shen raised his hand, standing in the middle of the ocean, using the power of the Wisdom Kingship to send out a call to the entire world. Streaks of fluorescence traversed space from the ends of the sky, gathering above this ocean, encircling God like a galactic river. The Wisdom Authority mythical factors dispersed between heaven and earth, along with the power that had dissipated due to the deaths of the royal family and the Trilobite men, all returned at the summons of the Crown of Wisdom. In the end, they all fell into the Crown of Wisdom. The originally black Crown of Wisdom took on a hint of dark gold, bearing a touch of immortality. Yin Shen withdrew his raised hand, and amidst the enveloping light, the black ring was also concealed, leaving no trace behind. As if it had been retracted along with God's power, dragged back into the crevices of time and space. 40. Yin Shen walked through the Sun Cup flower field, and thousands upon thousands of golden flower cups bloomed in unison, releasing golden pollen. Whoosh! The wind blew across the island, turning it entirely golden as the pollen gathered into a whirlpool. This should have been a scene straight out of a fantasy fairy tale, accompanied by an intoxicating floral fragrance that would captivate anyone. But Yin Shen couldn't smell the fragrance, nor could he feel the wind brushing past him. The gene fragments within the Sun Cup were devoured by the mythical blood in the Crown of Wisdom. As the Crown of Wisdom transformed along with Red Lucia's mythical blood, it evolved from a primary mythical bloodline to something even more perfect, and the power of the Wisdom Authority also underwent a metamorphosis. Unlike the primary Wisdom Authority, which only exerted its influence on consciousness and thought, the Wisdom Authority had now been fully materialized, becoming a divine power that could directly intervene with the external world. With a single thought from Yin Shen, the God-descended city submerged beneath the sea of flowers began to move. Rumble! Yin Shen raised his hand adorned with the ring, and he could clearly feel the entire God-descended city grasped within his palm. It was as if he could lift the entire city with a mere exertion of force. A smile appeared on his face. Is it really this powerful? His delight stemmed not only from the immense strength of this power but also from his ability to directly interface with reality through it. Although he still lacked a physical body, possessing this power finally allowed him to directly intervene with reality. Yin Shen walked through the ruined city, strolling above the flower sea and standing atop the mountain peaks. Without relying on the power of others, he could now grasp other objects in this world. However, as Yin Shen became proficient in wielding this power, he also felt that it was still far from perfect. It wasn't about lacking strength but rather lacking a sense of refinement and qualitative change. It was like comparing a water wheel powered by water to a steam engine or an internal combustion engine. Not to mention comparing it to the existence of electrical or nuclear energy. It should be able to become even more powerful and wondrous. As night fell, Yin Shen gazed at the mythical conch shells embedded in the walls of the temple. During the day, he had received the power and gains from the transformation of the Wisdom Authority's mythical blood during this period, which simultaneously gave birth to a new idea. An idea he once had but couldn't realize. Create a new type of mythical life. Originally, he wanted a life form to possess both the life and wisdom authorities, thus creating a completely different mythical life form. However, the two vastly different authorities and mythical bloodlines fiercely opposed each other. A single life form simply couldn't possess two types of authorities. But this new discovery opened up a new path for him to create a new type of mythical blood and approach. Since the mythical blood was also perfecting and completing itself, he could extract some gene fragments from the mythical blood of both the life and wisdom authorities and let them randomly combine within the mythical conch shells to see if they could form a new type of mythical blood. Perhaps the progenitor of another mythical life form, with a bloodline and power distinct from both Red Lucia and Shelley, would be born from this. Yin Shen was curious, what kind of existence will emerge from the fusion of the life and wisdom authorities? Before that, a vessel capable of carrying the mythical blood was needed. Yin Shen looked behind him. There, in the corner, the Sun Cup, which had been secretly watching Yin Shen, realized that this terrifying deity had turned his gaze towards it. In an instant, it turned its flower cup in the opposite direction. Trembling, weak, and helpless, seized by Yin Shen, the Sun Cup let out a hissing cry, struggling desperately like a mischievous child. Hiss hiss hiss. Even when Yin Shen had left for a while during the day, the Sun Cup didn't dare to run, or perhaps it couldn't run. It might be able to escape from Shelley's palm, but it could never escape from God's control. It could feel that the other party was the source of all mythical power in its own origin. He was its supreme ruler, its creator. Yin Shen placed the Sun Cup into the mythical conch shell. It couldn't speak or express its consciousness. But one could see that its desire to come out was very strong. It pressed tightly against the thin wall of the mythical conch shell, twisting towards the outside. Yin Shen waved his hand at the Sun Cup through the transparent thin wall. Sleep. When you wake up, everything will be different. The Sun Cup's flower buds slowly closed, its consciousness falling into slumber as it gently settled onto the bottom of the giant conch shell, its roots taking hold. The experiment began. Attempt after attempt, failure after failure. Experiments were tedious, and disappointment was the norm each day, but within this norm, one awaited that singular surprise. Day after day, year after year, finally, the long-awaited surprise arrived. A new mythical life was born. Yin Shen stood motionless in the temple, gazing at the scene within the luminous wall. The Sun Cup inside the conch shell was completely different from before. Although it was still golden, astonishingly, a human head was growing inside the flower cup. The gender was indistinguishable, but it was clearly a head resembling that of a human. Still a child, eyes closed, sleeping. Listening closely, one could hear the sound of snoring emanating from the flower cup, but that snoring carried a heavy tint of mysterious power, capable of lulling anyone to sleep just by listening for a moment. Yin Shen listened attentively, sensing that power. Then, the entire world suddenly changed. He vanished from the pyramid temple in the God-given land. Yin Shen surveyed his surroundings. This was also a temple, an exceptionally grand and majestic one. Here, too, stood a statue of himself, but it was evident that this was not the God-given land. He walked out of the temple and looked outside. This temple stood atop a high mountain, with a city built around it to guard it. At the foot of the mountain was a seemingly endless lake stretching as far as the eye could see. He heard the snoring sound again and continued walking forward. He saw the core consciousness of the Sun Cup, sleeping in an indoor flower bed. This was the birthplace of the Sun Cup, The God's cup flower garden in the Sky Temple. The king is here. Quickly go pay respects to the King of Wisdom. High Priest Shlode has already gone over. Several running trilobite men passed through Yin Shen's shadow and then vanished into the light behind him. This is a dream. A hint of intrigue appeared on Yin Shen's face. It was a dream, yet it far surpassed a dream. It was more like a dream world born within mythical cells, an illusory yet eternally existent realm of dreams. Even if the life and master it currently depended on were to perish, as long as this mythical bloodline endured and the mythical blood remained unrotted, this dream world, born from and intertwined with the bloodline, would exist forever.